Welcome to winter in Florida, and I'm really cold. I forgot my notes. Can I do this video without my notes? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Amanda, and today we're going to be doing something that kind of blew my mind. If you've been on my channel for any amount of time, or if you've known me for any amount of time, this is ridiculous. I have to take this off. You know that one thing that I preach pretty constantly is that I personally don't like short stories. And so because of matters that I could not control this year, I ended up in this past few weeks reading a short story anthology. And I'm here to talk to you about that experience because I do believe that this is the first time that I've actually started and finished a short story anthology. I have started a few, never once finished one. Other part of that surprise-ness of this video is that not only was it a short story anthology, but it was a Stephen King short story anthology. And if you know me, I've had a rough relationship with Stephen King. I have some that I absolutely love by him. I own and love both It and Pet Sematary. I think they're amazing pieces of literature, but I hated with all my might Misery, Salem's Lot. There are others that I can't think of right now. So I, for this month, had to pick up 2 Stephen King books for a challenge that me and my friends are doing, and I wanted to pick up really short ones because I'm not a huge fan of him doing the short ones. Even though I hate short stories, I've been told his short stories are good, so let's pick them up and read. I decided to pick up Graveyard Shift and Other Short Stories. God, that is boiling hot. Why do Keurigs make things so hot? Graveyard Shift and Other Short Stories contains 5 short stories in it, and of those 5, I read all 5 of them, but of those 5, one of them is supposed to be read in junction with Salem's Lot, and that is the final story, Jerusalem's Lot. But the rest of them, you don't need to read anything else to understand the story. And since I have read Salem's Lot actually quite recently and hated it, I figured going into this would be absolutely fine for me. I thought I would take you through my experience of reading all of them together, all of them separately, and then talk about the experience as a whole. Spoiler alert, I enjoyed this book. So the very first work in this short story collection is called Graveyard Shift, and we are following this man who works a graveyard shift. He works at night, I believe it is, and he's offered 4th of July he can come in, get like extra holiday pay if he comes in and works in this factory. Now this factory is overrun by rats, and they're pretty big, and he isn't really bothered by them because he's with them all day long. He sees them. This is back in the olden days, you know, like 19 something, when rats were allowed in buildings. Agrees to work this shift. He and the main manager who's in charge of him, the main manager kind of has issues with everyone, but the two of them have issues together. He's just kind of like, oh, mightier than thou kind of personality. I listened to all of them first off, and I really liked the narrator. I think this one was the second longest out of all of them, and it was about 45 minutes to an hour-ish, maybe a little bit longer. I enjoyed this. This was my favorite one in the entire collection. I think that it had the right amount of creepiness that I wanted, along with the balance of storytelling. And because it's a short story, Stephen King couldn't go on for hours and hours and hours with a lot of the subject matter that he likes to, which is where he often gets in trouble with me personally because he gets into racist and misogynistic issues. But he can't do that in a short story because he's got to wrap it up. He's got to finish it. So Graveyard Shift really did it for me. There was something about the way the rats were described and how they crawled all over the people and how big and bulbous they were. And without spoiling anything, at the end, of course, they come into like almost a new breed of rat. And the way it's described is so absolutely disgusting. Don't want to spoil it for you, but they were not quite like how we imagine rats to be. I ended up rating it 4 out of 5 stars, which is pretty dang high for me rating a short story. I think I can think of 2 short stories that I've rated higher than this one, and they were written by P. Djeli Clark and Shauna Maguire. Really good writers. I really enjoyed Graveyard Shift. It was a great creepy story. If you don't like rodents or rats at all, this will definitely creep you out and make you scared because it did it for me, and I don't have a fear of rats. In fact, me and my brother used to have a pet mouse, so I'm pretty chill with rodents of all kind. and this one's still like, ooh, it was creepy. I would have rated it 5 stars, but I felt like there was a lack of motivation behind the main character's actions. I felt like I didn't totally understand why he was making the choices he was making at the end of the book. I wanted to understand better why he was putting everyone in so much danger with his decisions, including himself. So the next book in this series is called The Man Who Loved Flowers, and I believe this was the shortest of them. It was very short. I think it was like 20 minutes, maybe. It was very creepy, but not at all during the story. It was very much written like a Twilight Zone episode. So the whole entire time we're following this man who everyone else is watching him, and they're so amazed with how in love he looks. They all just keep commenting on the fact of he's gonna go see the love of his life. And so he stops. We finally get into his head. He stops to buy his love flowers because he decides to treat her one day for no reason at all. So he buys flowers and then he goes to see her. And that's where the creepiness starts to happen. That's where the horror element comes into it. I'm not going to spoil it, but like I said, very much like a Twilight Zone episode, you really were not expecting it to turn out the way it did. I had a huge twist, huge turns. It was also really enjoyable. I ended up rating this one 3 out of 5 stars because while I did just say it was a big twist, I felt like because I knew it was a horror book and that something was going to happen, that it couldn't just be this happy-go-lucky 1950s man going home to see his wife after a long day of work, that I was expecting the thing to happen that happened. But it wasn't necessarily bad. It was really short. I don't have much more to say about it, but I would recommend it because of how short it is and how well it was written. There's definitely some issues with like the 1950s language, but I don't think anything was really extreme or even worth commenting on. So go into that one knowing that it's a pretty good story. And if you enjoy big twists and turns, then you'll enjoy this one. I will give you a warning. There's definitely some heavy on-page violence. So just get ready for that. I think that that one was way less gruesome than Graveyard Shift. The one after that is called The Last Rung on the Ladder. And let me tell y'all, this one did it for me. I don't even think I was supposed to necessarily be scared so much as like this one also read like a Twilight Zone episode and also had like the beginning is really happy and then a weird twist happens and something horrible happens because of that twist. And I think that part was supposed to be the part that made me like reflect on the story and think back on it and change my mind about things, right? But I was more scared about the first part in the story. So let me tell you what this story is about. We're following these two kids. I believe they're like 8 and 10, and it's the 8-year-old is a girl and the 10-year-old is a boy, and they live out on this family farm, and their parents kind of just let them do whatever because it's the olden days, you know, and people didn't necessarily pay attention to where their kids were going everywhere. So they have come up with this game where they climb up this, I think they said it's like 70 feet ladder up into the top of their barn, walk across a beam, and then jump into the hay at the bottom. And the ladder is really old and it's rickety and they're nervous. Well, they're not nervous. Their parents are nervous and their parents have basically told them don't do this, but they're still doing it in secret. The sister at one point is climbing up the ladder and the ladder rung, the top ladder rung starts to break and she can't get up and she can't get back down because the other ones have fallen out while she was climbing up. And so the boy moves hay to help save her fall. And that's where I'm going to leave you because there is lots of twists after that all happens. It was really enjoyable, and I think the reason why I felt the horror and the awfulness of the story is because I do have a horrible fear of heights. It is ridiculous. I will not go on step ladders. I will not step up onto something for you. If you need me to get you a thing, my 5'11" height better be able to reach it or I'm not getting it for you. I'm sorry. That whole entire part about her almost falling to her death, almost falling to her destruction, maybe falling to her death, maybe falling to her destruction was what really did it in for me. But that's not the part that's supposed to horrify you. Like I said, I'm not going into the part that's supposed to horrify you. It just did it for me. I really enjoyed it. I really liked the story. I think that Stephen King has something where he can write about kids really well. Even though I didn't like Salem's Lot, there is a student, I believe he's in like middle school at the time, who is front and center through a lot of the story, and that was my favorite part of it. And so I think Stephen King just has this knack for kids and horror together, and that's when I really seem to appreciate his works the most, such as in It and Pet Sematary. Oh, I also liked The Outsiders, which had to do with children too. And so I rated this one 3.5 because it didn't quite do it for me. The ending ruined things a little bit for me. I felt like it came kind of out of the blue, out of nowhere. Didn't really appreciate that. It just wasn't great, but I really enjoyed the story overall, and it gave me heebie-jeebies like I wanted. So the next story is called Night Surf, and this one was a piece of work. Like I said earlier, Stephen King in short stories has to write so little, so he can't fit in so much of his hatred for people and for people who aren't like him. But this one, he managed to fit it in. This short story is about, I believe there's like 3 or 4 kids at the end of the world. I think they're like late teenagers. At the end of the world, this pandemic has taken over. Hold up. This pandemic from China has taken over the entire world and killed off every single human, and they're the last humans left, and they start to think that they might have the sickness too and might be dying in the next few days. And it's kind of a commentary on being the last humans alive. That one should have affected me the most and been the most real and been the most horrifying because of 2020 and the year we're living in, and it felt so real. But the characters were so not believable. Even now that I've lived through and am continuing to live through a pandemic, none of these characters matched up with anything I would have guessed or anything that really happened to characters in a pandemic. The main character that we're following is the grossest character I have ever had to read through. I hated him. I almost skipped the story after a few minutes, and I'm glad I finished it up because it is pretty short, but it was gross. So he has this girlfriend in the story, and the entire time he is commenting on how fat she is, how disgusting she is, how he can't even stand her because she's needy and clingy. And that all leads up to him not only verbally abusing her, but also like a little bit of physically abusing her, and then eventually just kind of being whatever, I'll have sex with her because she wants me to. And then right after they finish having sex with each other, he's like, by the way, we're probably going to die in a few days. And she wants to be comforted by him, and he says, stop touching me, gets up and leaves. What? What the hell? Who wrote this? We know who wrote this. It was Stephen King. It was disgusting. It was so gross of a story. I hated it. I hated it. I rated it 2 stars. I honestly should have rated it 1 because of how gross it was. There was nothing good from it except for the very first page of the story. They find this man who has just died, and they're not really sure what to do with his body, but they decide to burn it. And it's interesting how Stephen King brings that into the story because you find out about them burning this human body before you find out about the illness. So you're first faced with these 4 teenagers who are trying to figure out what to do with a dead body that they found in a car, and they decide to burn it. And you're sitting there wondering, why did they decide to burn it? What's going on? Why are these teenagers doing this thing? Is this something with a cult? And then you keep reading and you realize that they're the last humans on Earth, so their actions don't have consequences. And I get that that's what the whole entire story was about, because the boy, his actions didn't have consequences, but it was so gross, so gross, so he made me want to go outside and punch the next man I saw. And the next man I saw did not deserve to be punched because of this man's atrocities, but I was angry. The last story in the short story collection is Jerusalem's Lot, and this is the one that I said had to do with Salem's Lot. So if you've read Salem's Lot, there's this character who we see reflected. He dies I think he's died actually before the story even starts, and so this story is about how his life affected the town. I honestly can't tell you much more than that. This story was really long. I think it was like 2 hours maybe, which isn't that long, but I zoned out for most of it. I ended up rating it 1 star because I hated it. I hated the entire thing. It was boring and dull, and I hated it. And it was letter format. I should warn you that that is a personal bias. I really can't stand books written in letter format. I've learned that. They're just slow paced, and I hate the choppiness of the writing, and a lot of times they just don't make sense to me. So that is something personal to me. Salem's Lot, though, is not written in letter format. I knew going in I was going to hate this one. I should have just skipped it, but I felt like I had already gotten through 4 that I pretty much enjoyed. Night Surf. So I was like, I just need to finish this up so I can get an accurate rating for the book itself. I don't want to DNF one of the short stories because then I felt like I was gonna have to DNF the whole entire book, even though that's not how it has to go at all. I'm actually not going to talk about Jerusalem's Lot any more than that because I don't care to. I rated it 1 star. Yeah, those were all of the short stories, and let me tell you, they definitely awakened this idea in my head that maybe the reason I don't like short stories normally is because I read fantasy. And when you read fantasy, it's all about the world and it's all about it being built and you getting immersed into it. But with horror, that is not the experience that you're trying to have. With horror, you're supposed to get a really quick grip on the story, and then you're supposed to be shocked and spooked and horrified and grossed out for the rest of the work. And that's so much more effective in short story format. I think I'd be willing to give more short story anthologies a shot if they were in other genres besides fantasy. I ended up rating this book as a whole 3 out of 5 stars. I wanted to rate it higher because of how much it meant to me and how good I really felt like it was, but those last 2 stories just really weighed it down. And when I did the math, I added up all of my ratings together and then divided by 5 to get an average rating. It was actually a 2.7, and that was with me giving Night Surf the benefit of the doubt and rating it a 2-star. So I felt like if I even rated a 3.5 or a 4, that it wasn't accurate to all of the stories in it. I also on my Goodreads wrote little blurbs that I've pretty much discussed with you right now, but if you want to know anything more or see it in writing, you can go onto my Goodreads, it's linked down below, and you can look up all the details I wrote about the day I finished the short story anthology. Yeah, overall I would say I recommend you checking this one out. I enjoyed it, and I'm someone who hates short stories. Maybe it's not a good one, because maybe people who love short stories will not like this short story collection. But that's pretty much it from me. I had a good old time reading it. I hope you had a good old time watching this video. Let me know if you've read this or any of the other books that I mentioned, or if you have a personal favorite of Stephen King, because I think I'm really close to calling it quits on him. I've read a lot of his works at this point and feel like I really have a grasp of what he has written as a person, but there are a few more I want to give a try to, so if you mention one of them down below, I'll move it up on my list and try to get to it sooner rather than later. Again, thank you for watching. I really appreciate each and every single one of you. I don't remember how my outro goes, but until next time, I will talk to you in the comments. Bye.